Hello, welcome back to the stream. This is going to be a continuation of a topic we had about a week ago now, pretty much exactly a week. More of a kind of open-ended discussion slash current events sort of show slash participatory internet experience on how to get some of the big tech influence out of your tech life. So Tuco decided to join us. It looks like the bits are flowing in all the usual spots. We are live on twitch.tv/scanlime. There's also the scanlime-in-progress channel on YouTube. And if you want to get the bits directly from the source, the freshest and lowest latency Tuco encodes possible, there's always live.diode.zone/scanlime. And the topic this time is really reducing dependencies on big tech. And so, of course, you're probably watching this stream on Twitch or YouTube. But even though we have to use so much big technology, it's nice to not depend so much on one specific thing as much as we can. I think on the last stream I mentioned that I've been kind of switching back and forth between iOS and Android every several years because it feels kind of gross to get too entrenched in any one ecosystem. And that's kind of how I feel with these video streaming systems like Twitch and YouTube. Well, it's nice to develop something separate, but it's also useful to interoperate with the existing systems. It's just nice to not get so intertwined with them that you can't leave. So it's nice to have some choice available still. Kind of in that vein, I'm back here with Z, represented by the sentient Pixel System 7 trash can in the corner, and we're gonna kind of focus a bit more on email and what it might mean to reduce your dependency on that giant email service that we all have gotten intertwined with these days, Gmail. My perspective is a bit more like kind of old school. Like I used to be more into running my own mail server and then kind of got lazy and switched to Gmail sort of right when it came out, and have been mostly not trying super hard to get off of it the last several years. And then Z's been looking more specifically just recently and like what are the actual options that people have today in getting off of Gmail and actually trying to make that change for themselves. So we wanted to start actually with following up with the survey that we presented on the last stream. So there's a website that kind of goes with this project, defangme, defangme.com, and it kind of lays out like what it is we're trying to talk about here. And you know, this is not a new idea. I think part of the motivation behind this was that this is something that I think a lot of sort of more like people who I keep wanting to call myself an old timer or something. I don't feel that old, but I feel like I've been in tech long enough to be thoroughly burnt out on it already. And I think a lot of folks in that position probably are so used to being burnt out on tech that maybe, like me, you haven't noticed just how widespread this is and how many people are so thoroughly burned out on tech despite having experienced it in maybe less depth or for less long than some of us. It's so bad that, you know, there are a lot of really mainstream reasons now to try to reduce your dependency on the large tech corporations. So this is more of a discussion on kind of practical advice and like what people are actually doing, what people are finding that works, and what we might try to work toward, but more what people can actually do to, in this real world we live in, this capitalist hellscape, what can we actually do to, you know, move toward the direction of having more decentralizing kind of agency in our communications again. Yeah, and, you know, not necessarily being absolutists about it, not trying to just focus on the cool and shiny new code projects, but to actually look at things kind of pragmatically. So, welcome.
So we got maybe 10 responses to that survey so far. I think we maybe had like 40 or 50 people total on the stream last time. So I think that's a decent, or maybe it was more than that, but I think that was a decent participation rate. A lot of the concerns that we talked about on air and on the website came up in the surveys. So I think there's a fair amount of people that are on the same page. It was interesting to see which companies people were most concerned about. Intuitively, I might have guessed Google and Facebook, and that is what came out. Those are the ones that were mentioned the most. Amazon and Apple had a fair amount of mentions. Microsoft people are more concerned about than Netflix, for example. I mean, Netflix, aside from the DRM stuff, it's hard to think of a lot of nefarious things they're involved with, which is not the case with Google and Facebook, I think. So Microsoft is pretty high on the list. Spotify, people mentioned Spotify a few times, and then a bunch of ones that aren't in like the classic big five, so to speak, or in the acronym FANG, but they're also pretty big tech companies. So Adobe, Twitter, ByteDance, Equifax. I don't know if they're technically a tech company, but they're certainly part of the surveillance economy, you could say.
Like the data industry.
The data industry.
Somebody has Sony, which I would definitely +1 Sony.
Yeah, I
mean, Sony and Disney and Apple are kind of up there as the most litigious companies that are kind of trying to crush everyone else's technology to make sure no one can mess with theirs even slightly. A lot of the concerns that people listed specifically are similar to ones we've been talking about. Mistreating workers came up a fair amount, being anti-union, political manipulation, misinformation. We mentioned this last time, but the COVID situation, I don't know scientifically how much of it is because of social media or big tech or whatnot, but it certainly isn't helping. I mean that's how it seems, at least. I mean, I wonder how things went 100 years ago in the Spanish flu. You know, I think we knew a lot less from like a public health point of view, but if we did know, I wonder how that information would have spread relative to today with all the social media. Yeah, there's just so much just like fractal levels of distrust between everybody at this point, combined with just the speed that information moves at. That seems like it probably produces something uniquely bad.
And alternatives that people have been trying, people mentioned DuckDuckGo as a search engine. Someone mentioned Ecosia as a search engine alternative, and they said they had a bad experience with it, I think. So I can't recommend it, but I haven't tried it personally. Someone was really making a shout out to Scuttlebutt, which we did mention, but this person thought that people that listen to this stream might specifically be really into Scuttlebutt, and so I think maybe we should look into that for next time.
Yeah, I've been wanting to give it a deper look. So like Z and I tried just pretty briefly to message each other on it, but it was via a mobile app that was pretty lacking in debug info. And I feel like we talked about this a little bit last time, that a lot of the times with these decentralized applications, there's no one central source of truth, which also means there's not necessarily any one good source of central, like, good error messages. So if you're trying to connect to a decentralized network and you don't even know where that decentralized network is, it's often challenging to report like what part of the connection failed. And then I think you find these sort of really high-level user interfaces try to make these networks more approachable, but then they also remove some of the information that I, as a maybe more patient user, would want to use to debug that in detail.
Yeah, so we maybe 2 months ago, something like that, we tried, I think the app was called Manyverse. It was a Scuttlebutt app, and we couldn't get it working. People mentioned Mastodon, I think both in a good light and in a negative light. Like they want
Yeah.
they want something that's even easier to use than like I think Mastodon is pretty user friendly. Like they are trying to take some of the sting out of the more complex architecture that exists. But I think this person that took the survey thought that Mastodon still is a little too hard for non-technical people to get going with.
That's interesting. I feel like I haven't noticed that the like user interface in Mastodon being super technical, but I've definitely noticed that like as a community it feels more like kind of like a tech hangout a lot of the time. And that might just be the parts of Mastodon that I've found or that I have chosen to stay in, but like it feels sometimes kind of like, early 2000s or late 90s like Slashdot kind of, the tech internet watering hole, like the place that's not mainstream enough for the like sort of less tech enthusiast users to stick around in. But, people can hang out and talk about like weird programming languages and, compare notes on the latest Linux kernel build and whatever.
Yeah. So I think people want more accessible social media. Someone mentioned trying to use more open hardware. So I don't know if they are using a Pine phone or they want to use a Pine phone. I think we've also heard people say last time that they didn't feel like the Pine phone was ready for the average person yet, which is probably true. And they were talking about like laptops with open firmware as well.
I still find myself super skeptical of the Pine phone, but I shouldn't talk about it much because like I haven't actually used one.
Yeah.
I just feel like the goal of producing like such a foundational sort of device like a phone, something that is so complicated that people have such high expectations for, um, like doing it with a small team, I don't know that they're going to really achieve anything that people like want them to achieve. Like if you want something that is more sustainable or more open or more ethical or more hackable, like you might get some of those, but like I kind of worry that it's just going to be more like something that focuses on just the hackability or just like a narrow definition of openness, and then doesn't make any progress on the whole supply chain that's really the problem with this technology. Like you can't get, there's no ethical way to get a CPU right now. Like there's this whole problem that, I mean, I think the Fairphone folks, I think those folks tried a little harder to like get to the core of the issue, and even that, like they couldn't really reach something that they were satisfied with.
Someone mentioned Protonmail. We're going to talk a bit about Protonmail later.
Yeah, there's also a question about whether we're done with coding on this stream. I think this is not going to be like a really coding stream. This is going to be more of like a discussion stream. But if you want to just watch me stare at a Rust editor, I did 2 of those streams earlier this week. So check the archives on Diode Zone or on Twitch or YouTube.
Some other people mentioned, I guess in a certain way, one of the easier tech giants to stop using is Amazon in terms of retail and supplies and things like that. Like specific things might be hard to find that you're used to finding on Amazon, but there aren't necessarily the same network effects as on like Facebook and things like that. So hopefully people that are doing Christmas shopping or things like that are not using Amazon this year very much. And then people told us some of the things that they wish existed or that they want more of. We already mentioned more accessible social networks, resources for friends that are less technical. So guides on how to reduce your use of this or that company. So I think we're both interested in producing content like that. We already mentioned the open firmware laptop, and more people. So I think this was someone who responded who is already part of this kind of subculture of people that are trying to use more open source hardware and software, and they just want more people to talk about it with and for support with, which is part of what we're trying to do. Should we talk about Facebook for a minute?
Yeah.
So one of my friends who was on the stream last time said, "Oh, it just seems so hopeless. It's just, little chat rooms full of nerds complaining about these giant tech companies, and it's never going to amount to anything." Well, it turns out these concerns are pretty widespread, and the U.S. Justice Department, at least.
Even the United States Justice Department.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, Facebook is such a hard case because it's not like Amazon. You can just be like, well, I'm going to buy my paper clips from my local paperclip merchant. It has such network effects that it's kind of hard to not use. So I quit Facebook a few years ago, but I still kept an Instagram account. Anyway, so the Justice Department is apparently going to try to sue Facebook for antitrust. And this isn't guaranteed to succeed, but some people think it has a chance of succeeding. And the goal, what they're trying to do, is basically split off Instagram and split off WhatsApp. And that seems like it would be messy. I'm not really sure what the world would look like if that happened, but I just think it's interesting that this could happen. It could be a big deal. We may still want to get off all three of those for different reasons, depending on who's running them. But this could be a step in a good direction. I don't otherwise know a lot about antitrust, so I don't want to say too much about this case. But it's a big freaking deal.
This is reminding me just how enraged the nerds, speaking of like the Slashdot era, that was just such a big thing to just push buttons on tech people in that like late 90s, early 2000 era, was like getting people riled up about Microsoft, because like forcing people to pay for Windows, and like, I mean, it just seems like such small potatoes nowadays. Like now we have just like obvious, blatant corruption and worker exploitation, and these massive surveillance machines that are just consuming our lives to a much greater extent than I think even the sci-fi authors of that era imagined. And now people are less enraged about it just because we have less energy, I guess, to fight back. So that's a little frustrating. Or maybe it just impacts people's favorite hobby less. It's like easier to get nerds to care about the tech antitrust when it also means that they have to like pay for software, or they don't get the source code to all their favorite libraries or whatever. Oh yeah, Concrete on YouTube chat mentions the effects of Bell getting split up, and yeah, I wasn't really old enough to really understand the fallout from the Bell split up. That would be interesting to compare this to.
Yeah.
I mean, this kind of action feels necessary but insufficient, right? Like, even if Facebook got split up into like 5 small companies, they would all probably still be a problem to some extent, but it would at least be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Before we talk about getting off Gmail, maybe we should just talk about email in general, get a sense for what people are using. So I've been using Gmail for years. I have sort of a weird plan because I started using I think they call it G Suite now, but I started using basically their G Suite version of Gmail before that was even a paid thing. And so they let me keep it for free, I think, ever since then. It's like I was originally on a free plan, although I'd have to pay for it if I quit and then tried to restart it. And it's so convenient in certain ways, but, it's also one of the main ways that I still am using Google. I mostly use DuckDuckGo now for search. So anyway, so I was trying to get off Gmail, but I'm curious what other people are using. So someone mentioned Protonmail. Someone who took the survey had a hey.com email address, which is a newer email service that came out this year. What are some of the other ones? Tutanota, I'll mention in a minute, but that one I only heard of recently because a friend of mine uses it.
I'd seen, so actually one of the places that I see email hosts that aren't Gmail sometimes is when people sign up for Diode Zone. I wouldn't publish those email addresses, of course, but like as an administrator, I can see the addresses that people are signing up under, and sometimes it's Gmail, but sometimes it's an interesting like smaller host, and that's I think where I first saw Tutanota. Gosh, I've had a experience with email where that might be familiar to some people that were like tech enthusiasts about my age or who started on the internet kind of fairly early on, like in the late 90s. Um, so this was way before Gmail. I think a lot of folks, when I was first using the internet, had like AOL addresses or Yahoo addresses. Yahoo.com was just so popular. I think that was what most people had at that point. But it was a little bit smaller. It was also a lot more common for people to have email addresses that were just at their internet service provider's domain. It was like one of the really historically core things that an internet service provider would provide. They weren't just a pipe to the internet. They were also a home for your email. They would give you a web presence and like a shell and a way to, read and post to Usenet. So ISPs used to be a bit more full service. Nowadays Comcast wants you to like think of them as full service if they're going to sell you television and phone or something. But it used to be people actually had internet services that they went to their internet service provider for. And I mean, you can still find that now. It just isn't nearly as like an everyday occurrence on the internet. So it was common if you were some sort of a power user and you didn't have a machine that was permanently connected to the internet, as most home users wouldn't have, but you could dial into the internet through an ISP. You still wanted a lot of control over your email. It was pretty common to have your own local email server set up that wasn't permanently connected to the internet, but it would just dial into your internet service provider every so often and fetch your mail using a program called FetchMail. It was a common way to do it. So that used to be fairly common, and I did that for a long time. Basically, as soon as I decided that AOL and Yahoo were annoying, and started getting into running my own Linuxy stuff at home when Linux was still pretty young. I was running like Procmail, which is a tool that will help you like filter and direct mail to different inboxes or different subprograms or whatever. It's just like setting up like tags in Gmail, except a lot more powerful. Like you can run arbitrary programs. And then I would use a mail transfer agent, so something like SendMail or XM. You'd use a mail user agent to read your mail. So it used to be more like, the Unix philosophy applied to this. You'd have many small programs that would do a small number of things that you could glue together in standard ways. So you'd have standard file formats. You could always expect to have a big text file or a big directory in a certain standard format that you could use to export email from place to place. So that's something that I really got used to and enjoyed, and I think a lot of people in that era enjoyed. It got harder to maintain that over time, partly because spam got to be more and more of a problem, and so I think like the average email user was not going to write like custom filters to get rid of all their spam. So email was just not as useful for people who didn't spend a lot of time setting up spam filtering, or for people who had been on the internet long enough to have collected some spam. So like I think a lot of what Gmail offered people, besides just the simplicity, was really good spam filtering and a lot of storage space back when 1 gigabyte was a really big deal on the internet. So then that was really appealing to a lot of people, including me. And so I stopped running my own email server and kind of migrated stuff to Gmail. I think a lot of people got kind of stuck on Gmail that way. And so you can stick other services onto Gmail, like on the front end or the back end. After your mail gets to Gmail, you could pull it off and process it elsewhere. You could, instead of giving out your Gmail address to people, you can give out other addresses and set up forwarders. So there's all these sort of intermediate solutions still, kind of between completely using Gmail and completely self-hosting. But it is very easy to just use the all-in-one kind of cloud-hosted products these days, including email.
Yeah. Can people see the email tab there? Yeah. So I'm not as tech savvy as Micah. I don't think I've ever hosted my own email or even really close to it. I feel like I was using Hotmail before Gmail, but I don't think I still have those accounts, unfortunately. But so this is Peter Level's site, No More Google, and I just think it's a decent kind of starting point for looking at a list of well-known alternatives. I don't know if I agree with the ranking, but it's interesting to see the ranking. So this is the section on Gmail or on Google Mail. And so my situation is I have like a regular Gmail account, which I think has one set of problems. And then I have a custom domain that I've been using Gmail with, like the G Suite feature, more or less. And it's interesting having an email account which is tied to a provider. There's some downsides to that. There's some upsides to that. I think it's a little harder with migrating because those are the bytes that everyone knows. So you can't necessarily easily update all of your newsletter subscriptions and things like that. So I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do to try to sunset my Gmail account. But the other one, the G Suite one, in theory, it's pretty easy. Basically, Google managing my email for that domain, the way that's instantiated is basically there's these MX records at the registrar which point to Google. And so if I just point them somewhere else, now someone else manages the email, or at least the new incoming email. So so I was basically looking through this list of providers plus a few other ones and trying to say, do they have the features I need? Do they have a good price? What are they offering? Each of them has their own pros and cons. So I basically took this list, eliminated a few that don't make sense. So GMX, for example, is ad supported. Canary Mail is just an iOS app. Private email at the bottom is from Namecheap. And they might be doing a great job, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time looking into it because I'd rather, same thing with Zoho, like I'd rather use a company where email is their main business, all things being equal at least. So if you look at what remains, you get Fastmail, Protonmail, Tutanota, and Postio. And then there's a few more that are worth thinking about. Hushmail has been around for a long time. Mailbox.org is a newer German offering, kind of similar to Postio by the look of it. And then blanking on the other one, hey.com. Yeah. So if you look at all of those, a lot of them are pretty decent depending on what you're looking for. So Protonmail has a free tier. So if you're just looking for like a cheap, simple email account that isn't Gmail, check out Protonmail. You probably already have, a lot of you. Tutanota, probably the same thing, but I had some issues with them. Why don't we switch to the screenshots?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I think I can do it. Hold on. So their status page said that they were up. I couldn't reach them, at least not from the house. Got a second opinion. Once I got in a VPN, I was able to reach Tutanota, but along the way I saw a tweet from someone saying that they often can't reach Tutanota because they seem to be getting DDoSed or something. So that was not a good first experience. I did eventually get through on a VPN from Europe somewhere. Tried to sign up for an account, but I mostly just wasn't having a good experience with it. And meanwhile, I was looking into mailbox.org, which is pretty interesting. They have a good price. They have a lot of features that people might need, or at least that I needed. I think custom domains are free, or they come with all the plans. I think it just seemed too small. I think I at least would be interested in going with a provider that's been around for a bit longer, and the user interface also kind of left something to be desired. So one question, if you're trying to get off Gmail, is like, do you usually interact via IMAP, or do you use the web client? And if you use the web client, like, do you use the keyboard shortcuts heavily, things like that? Some of the other providers actually have much more Gmail-like features. So you see the check boxes there, like you can use the same kind of JK, and I think X is the other one, toggle. And so I think that workflow is worth something to me, at least. Yeah, so Fastmail, Protonmail, Tutanota, those to me seem like some of the most interesting alternatives. Fastmail is a bit cheaper than Protonmail, but they don't have any additional encryption. Protonmail, a bit more expensive, but they at least try to do end-to-end encryption for emails that are sent totally within their servers. But I don't totally know how much I actually believe in that feature. Like email wasn't designed to be encrypted, and so I don't know if it makes a ton of sense to design a service that's like trying to bolt that on, because I don't think it's going to work particularly well, given how other email providers aren't going to be using that. So and that's similar to some of the issues that Hushmail, I think, ran into. Like, Hushmail is this much older encrypted email service, but if you're trying to send a Hushmail outside of the Hushmail network, they basically get a link to like a web page. Like, they don't get an email. But anyway, so I eventually went with, actually for one domain, I paid for a Fastmail account. So I'm going to get a bit of experience with how that works. But for my main account, I basically decided to use Protonmail. And so I just wanted to take screenshots of the sign-up flow so people could see like what's involved. So I ended up picking the professional plan because that's the only one that has catch-all aliases. One of the other downsides of Protonmail that I thought was a downside is they didn't immediately, at least, support IMAP. And to me, that seems like one of the most important parts of having an email provider. And so that their encryption concept basically meant that you couldn't use IMAP for a while. But then I think a few years ago, they came out with Bridge. And so basically, I think it's like a daemon that lives on your computer and basically encrypts and decrypts your mail according to the Protonmail protocols, like, so you can at least on your computer use normal IMAP with like Apple Mail or something like that, or Thunderbird.
I'm honestly not. I feel like that's actually kind of an okay solution, given how hard it is to do IMAP correctly and securely. I feel like if they did just implement, whatever the latest IMAP SSL extensions are, there would still be so many ways to configure it incorrectly, and there'd still be so many clients that wouldn't support it correctly. And so this, I can imagine, if I was in their shoes, this would be a good way to give people a pretty uniform encrypted sort of IMAP experience without requiring any particular email client or any like esoteric protocol features.
Yeah, so I don't know much about IMAP, but I wanted to be able to use it, and so the fact that they added this recently was kind of what got me off the fence.
Yeah, I'd be tempted to hook this up to Fetchmail and have this like weird hybrid of like a new encrypted Protonmail setup and like the kind of old school stuff I'm more used to.
Someone's asking if we run Protonmail.
No, that's not me. Sorry. Your princess is in another castle.
run it, like, do we run it on our machine, or are we in charge of Protonmail? I don't think we're in charge of Protonmail.
No. I mean, unless I'm like sleepwalking and starting internet companies or something, and I secretly live in, where are they? Like, they're somewhere in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Switzerland. Yeah, I've never been to Switzerland. Sorry.
So if you decide you want an account, but I think it sounds like we're promoting them, because today there's a
we're not promoting any of this.
I mean, there is a Black Friday sale that expires tomorrow, but I'm just saying that because I saw it, not because they're paying me. But so anyway, so I just, if you log in, you're like, I want to pay for this thing. You click something like upgrade to plus or upgrade to professional. You get kind of a standard payment modal,
3D verification.
and then once you've paid, you get a little welcome message like this. So I clicked add your domain. You get a little screen like this. And those tabs along the top are basically your to-do list. So once you add a domain, it'll switch to tab 2, and it's like, well, you got to add this TXT record. So these are basically all, like, if you own a domain, you probably have had to mess with the DNS records at least once. And so you may or may not have added a TXT record before, but it's all pretty straightforward. The ampersand symbol, depending on your provider, it might be just, leaving the field blank. And they give you these kind of standard disclaimers like, oh, it can take up to a day or hours for DNS to propagate. But this all got taken care of within a few minutes, at least for me.
Yeah, it can vary a lot. What's actually going on there is it depends on the state of the cache on all the DNS servers between the two endpoints that you're trying to get a connection between. So like, if it's a new domain and no one's cached it, it can be really fast. But if you change it, and then like one way that I've often experienced a really slow domain changeover is if I change it in like whatever like DNS control panel I'm changing, but then internally it takes them a couple minutes to update the actual DNS server. And within that window, if I try to load it from whatever endpoint I actually want to load it from, then that endpoint and everywhere on the chain will just cache the old value, and I'll have to wait the entire cache expiration time until the new value comes along.
Tam Weil said something in the chat I was curious about. They use Mailo for subscription services, or for subscription to services, but I'm not sure what Mailo is.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. That's interesting.
And then I've heard of Disroot, but I don't remember what it is.
I only set my TTL to max 1 hour, never more. I mean, some people like having a cache, but you do you.
Mailo looks like another private email provider. Maybe I'll look into that more later. But anyways, let's just finish going through the setup here. So you have to create an account, like some name at your domain. This was a little bit of a head scratcher. Just to create an account, you basically have to create, I think these are SSH keys basically. I picked the last option. And then basically you're kind of in this like waiting for DNS state. I don't remember if they really tell you, but you basically have to keep going through all these tabs. So set up some MX records. So this is what it used to, this was the moment of the switchover, more or less, is I go to DNS simple. These records have been there for years and years. You put in the new ones, and then I think at that point pretty much from that point on, any mails that are being received are going to go to Protonmail. These last few tabs, I think, are kind of extra security measures. I didn't have equivalent versions of that set up before.
Yeah, they're not mandatory. It's like it'll like I don't know how all the clients display it these days, but like in Gmail at least, it gives you this extra like, oh, this message could be verified or this message couldn't be verified.
Yeah, so I went ahead and set this one up. These DKIM records, and I think I skipped this last one because they said if you do it wrong, it can cause problems. And that was pretty much it. So it took just it took a few minutes to do that setup, like from checkout to the DNS records is just a few minutes. Then I went to Google Takeout and just requested a copy of my email from my main account. And, I don't remember how many minutes it was, but basically less than an hour, just a few minutes between like doing the DNS stuff and getting these emails in the new account. So, I thought it might take a day or something like that.
I'm thankful that Google Takeout exists. I think I did have to scrape some emails off of my Gmail before that existed, and that was super annoying. You can also, by the way, that's super nice if you have a YouTube account and you want to migrate your videos elsewhere. If you do Google Takeout on YouTube, it will give you the full non-transcoded original resolution copy of everything you've uploaded to YouTube. So it could be enormous, but it's nice that they actually keep that data for you. So that can be pretty handy too.
Yeah. Guzabaku is talking about hosting one's own mail server on a cloud droplet.
Oh yeah. I mean, that could be nice. I mean, so like I used to run my own mail server pretty regularly. I think I've done that on, virtual hosts, but also just on, my like residential ISP connection. It's just that like nowadays there are a lot more IP addresses that either just have port 25 filtered or that will appear on somebody's spam block list. So having an address that can receive email is maybe not that hard. You just need port 25 not to be blocked. Even on pretty nice ISPs, or not nice, like most ISPs are kind of annoying, but like even on ISPs that mostly don't block your traffic, like the fiber provider I'm on here, they are usually still going to block 25 because it's just rampant for abuse. Like spammers really like to like send mail from like malware on residential connections. But yeah, if you want to run it on a cloud server, that's pretty cool. I've also got kind of feelings about cloud servers because, would I rather have, would I rather be paying somebody for reselling an Amazon instance to me, or would I rather be paying like someone who has a data center sort of focused on email stuff, or would I rather just try to do it all myself? I feel like those all have kind of different trade-offs.
TensorCat just gave a shout out to Mail in a Box.
Mail in a Box. I haven't heard of that one either.
So on screen, I just went to the GitHub repo for the, I think, a lot of the web front end for Protonmail.
Interesting.
And I found it because, part of the stream is just talking about, what off-the-shelf components or services exist. So Gmail versus Protonmail. I think in a lot of cases, people are going to find, or they've already found, that the alternatives are not as polished. And so, if I'm now a Protonmail customer, it's only a matter of time, and it already happened actually. It's only a matter of time before I'm going to be like, oh man, I really miss this feature of Gmail where you can just click here and it does this thing. So the first thing that I noticed missing is I can't find an easy way to make a filter from an email. So suppose you get a spammy email and you want, or it's a mailing list that's too chatty. I love the feature where you can just, I forget where you click exactly. But it'll pre-populate the filter form with like the name of the email or the name of the mailing list or the name of the sender. And you can, it takes like 4 clicks or something to just start creating a new filter in Protonmail, and it's not pre-populated with anything. So I don't know. I wonder how hard it would be to just build that feature in the client.
I was just looking at Mail in a Box, and this looks really cool. I think this would be up a lot of folks' alley. I might have to try this too. Because I'm still on the fence about whether I'd want to host it like on a cloud provider or something else. But if you're just setting up a random cloud server, this looks like a highly automated way to get a pretty nice modern email experience. Um, so yeah, I've never used this. I can't endorse it, but it looks pretty cool and it seems worth checking out. Starts as all good installations do with a curl pipe sudo sh. Yeah, there's basically no configuration. It just runs. So, not going to be what everybody wants. Might not be what I want, but seems worth looking into for sure. It's an Ubuntu. Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for the tip. Yeah, TensorCat says that they've used it for years. And they add the caveat that to do it right still takes a little bit of knowledge, especially to make it compliant enough that it works with all the services that you might want to use. It gets more involved if you're using your own DNS. Yeah, I haven't looked into this sphere in a while. I think I mentioned earlier on the stream that I used to run like Xm and Procmail and Fetchmail for my own setup, but haven't looked into what people have written in the last 10 years really.
And maybe we could check it out and do another stream on it. Like
Yeah.
I'd be curious to try setting up mail in a box just as the proof of concept, even if I'm not going to rely on it.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Yeah, that might be some good advice though. That if you're not a programmer, that maybe you should try Protonmail. Yeah, I don't know if I would gatekeep it like that though. I think what this is mostly about is like how annoying is something going to be given the existing experience that someone has, and then what's like your tolerance for annoyance. Do you want something that works with like an evening's worth of effort or a weekend's worth of effort, or are you just going to hack on this all year? And people have different thresholds for that. Oh, DNS crypt proxy, that also seems interesting.
Oh, really? The IMAP comment?
Oh, yeah. Apparently IMAP doesn't work with the free Protonmail accounts. Yeah, that's a bummer. Apparently Adler's wondering if I know GeoHots because he's streaming right now also. No, I don't know them. It's been a long time since I've heard that name though. It's kind of funny. Yeah, I feel that way too. Platypus says that they want to run their own mail server, but the ISP is being bad. Yeah, I got really used to running my own stuff, and it's annoying when ISPs block ports, but given how abuse-prone SMTP is, it's not surprising. It would just be nice if we had an email protocol that was easier to deploy on just like today's encrypted network that does not rely generally on IP address trust as much as, the SMTP universe does. Yeah, I feel like GeoHots and I don't have a lot in common, although, our names sometimes appear in similar places. It's kind of like when I open up like Twitter or YouTube or something, and like I see this sometimes when I'm using Twitter from my cat's account. It'll recommend that I follow a bunch of accounts because they're, I guess, like similar to my account, because I think that's the only one my cat follows. And a lot of the time there are people that I like extremely don't get along with in real life, but like Twitter's algorithm has decided that we're similar. Oh yeah, if anybody has not heard of the channel, so I stream on YouTube and on Twitch. This is on twitch.tv/scanlime, or on my live streams are on YouTube as scanlime-in-progress, but then I have these kind of infrequent edited videos that are on the like main Scanlime channel. Oh, temporary domains from your ISP sound useful. Kind of curious how that works. Are these like dynamic DNS, or you mean like like disposable subdomains for email? I'm just glad that GeoHots was so interesting to sue that he's the only one Sony like decided to sue. He was just very interesting and loud and like good at being sued. Oh, that's another good point. Platypus adds that their ISP doesn't block ports; they just won't give you reverse DNS. And yes, that's a big problem. I'm also going to have that problem because I think my ISP does block 25. But if I didn't hit that problem, I did actually ask my ISP if they'd give me a reverse DNS, and they're like, no. So that is probably a common response, unfortunately.
What does that mean? Giving you a reverse DNS?
So that means that if you do reverse DNS, I'm not going to get the technical nomenclature exactly right, probably, but there's a DNS record that has this kind of special form that's like your IP address dot like I don't know something like ARIN INET something or other, and so that record can attach information to the IP address rather than to the name. So you can set it up as this reverse pointer back to the name so that if you look up the IP address, it'll tell you what name goes with it. But because it's something that kind of belongs to the IP address rather than the name, it's something you have to ask the ISP for, or like whoever actually owns the IP address. And it's not something that you commonly need these days, but like it used to be the reason I wanted an RDNS was so that when I logged into IRC and the IRC server would reverse resolve your domain, instead of just being some random, something or other like dial up at isp.net or whatever, it would be, a name that actually matched the machine I was connecting from. But like email actually uses that in a lot of cases to verify that the sender isn't just some random compromised Windows machine, but is actually a properly configured email server on a legitimate ISP. So, I mean, but like all these like annoyances kind of fall into the same category of email is based on a set of protocols that were never designed to be secure or reliable or resistant to people just messing with them. So instead, people have had to apply layers of blacklisting and filtering on top of email, and those layers. There's the like cryptographic layers that we were just looking at on the DNS records, but people also tend to just rely on like IP address facts, like like the remote or the reverse DNS and the looking up the IP address in various reputation databases to see if it's being commonly used for spam. Yeah, GZB says that with DKIM we most probably won't need RDNS in the future. Yeah, it's a good point that like email is just a scab with like a dozen band-aids on top of it, and like some of those band-aids are no longer necessary if we keep the upper layer band-aids on, but the issue is just that it's such a messy, fragmented system that you're kind of relying on a combination of methods, no single one of which is going to be deployed everywhere right now. And so yeah, I mean, that's why people have all these different ways of like securing or authenticating email. You have like heuristics in your spam filters. You have cryptography with like PGP or GPG for encrypted email. You have this custom stuff that Protonmail is doing. You have like domain-based verification like DKIM. You have IP address-based verification like RDNS, and like these are all just different solutions, like different partial solutions to the same set of problems. But that's part of why I like email. Like it's this kind of messy political mashup of old and new technologies that feels like it's very mature in this way that is both a compliment and an insult. Like it's had its time to kind of shake out the its interface between the kind of theoretical protocol and the real world actors that are using that protocol in a way that maybe a lot of newer things haven't. So, I mean, it's definitely due for a refresh, but it's also this like kind of inspiringly real world construct on this internet where we more often find ourselves throwing away protocols and trying to start from scratch.
TensorCat, I'm curious if you have issues being able to send mail and getting people to accept your mail. That's cool.
Yeah, they said no problem. So yeah, I'd be curious to try that. I mean, other than my personal email, the other email setup that I've done recently has been outgoing email for Diode Zone and some of the related services that I run there. And because I couldn't get RDNS, I couldn't send the mail from here. So I ended up relaying it through Mailgun, which when I started, it was free. They don't have a free plan anymore, but it's really cheap. Like I think my monthly bill for Mailgun is usually like $1. So it's close enough that I can keep using it, but you know, I wouldn't mind switching to something that's more under my control or more free or more general purpose. Ooh, TensorCat says they passed the SMTP test 100%. Tell us about the SMTP test. I don't know about conformance testing for SMTP. Also, what daemon do you run? Or is this mail in a box? So like, what does mail in a box run? So Roundcube webmail. Oh, Nextcloud. That's kind of handy. It just says an IMAP SMTP server here. Which IMAP SMTP server? Oh yeah, here's another explanation for like, can you run it at home? Which is basically what we were just talking about. The ISP is going to block 25. There are spam blacklists, and your IP address probably can't do reverse DNS. And this is all directly because like it is so blocked, and it's been blocked by all these different ways because it's so easy for spammers to set this up. Like because email is this kind of authentication-free protocol where anyone can just send a message to you and like right on your public to-do list. It was too easy to abuse. But if we hadn't gotten into this position of having a very easy to abuse protocol, then it would have actually been nice if people could just use their home computer as an email endpoint. But this is just like one of those we can't have nice things problems with technology. TensorCat says it's Dovecot and Postfix. Interesting. Yeah, Spam Assassin. Yeah, I used to run Procmail and Spam Assassin, and that wasn't too bad. It still felt like Gmail was a nice like breath of fresh air at the time because I was so used to my spam still getting through. But there are probably better open source spam servers than there were last time I tried that. Gosh. This is also bringing back some like weird flashbacks to doing weird email configurations for that that notification service I used to run. I don't know if anybody else knows about this, but I used to run this thing called... Does the domain even still work? No, I let this one expire. Does this one still work? No, I let both of those expire. This used to be this was like back in the early 2000s. I ran this thing that was like a check-in notification service. So when you check in code to, usually like CVS or Subversion at the time, it would pop up a message in your IRC chat with the latest commit information. And so so it was basically like a message delivery hub that would take messages from these little notification scripts and then generate chat messages. And so internally it was based on email because from all these places where you'd be running your CVS or Subversion server and installing a hook script, it was pretty common that you'd be allowed to send email from those, because the other thing people were usually doing in those hook scripts was sending mail to themselves or mail to a mailing list when they had a check-in. So because I was already in this environment where it was expected that you could send outgoing email, I made the whole communication protocol for this project based on email so that you could install this script in your repository that would send a specially formatted like XML email to this central service. And then that central service would dispatch that out to whatever chat thing. This was also an early instance of me making something that was unintentionally sort of centralizing things more than they needed to. But back then it was just fun, and we didn't have all this centralization eating the world via that particular route yet. 180 domains, that's a lot. I think I would need some tooling to manage that. This mail in a box thing is an interesting, it's causing me to think about what the kind of eventual ease of use model will be for various kinds of decentralized hosting. Because with PeerTube right now, you have to be a bit committed to both the kind of technical fussing with it and the ongoing maintenance and the kind of community management to make something like a PeerTube server or even like a Mastodon server go. But I'm imagining once you have something that's easy enough, you can just give people a script that they run and tell people exactly how much it'll cost from various like hosting providers. This seems like a good place to aim for various kinds of decentralized services. That's pretty interesting. Oh yeah, so these folks are saying like $12 a month, and then TensorCat says they use Vultr, which is a hosting provider I have not heard of, for $5 a month.
It's pretty cursed.
That is pretty cursed.
I mean, clearly the .com wasn't what was taken.
And then GZP says that it's $3 a month to run this on Cloudflare about. That's interesting. I don't know how I'd feel about running my email on Cloudflare, though. It's getting a little too big for comfort. I feel like there's this whole other discussion you could get into about, like, if you want cloud hosting, like, what hosting providers, would you feel comfortable keeping important data on? Or, like, would you want to get a tiny virtual host? I mean, this guide was kind of touching on the fact that there's a pretty serious economy of scale here. If you share your email server with a couple of friends, you can make that $12 a month virtual machine go quite a lot further. And if you have a physical machine, you could host probably a practically unlimited number of email accounts on like a pretty basic physical server at this point. Yeah, and yeah, TensorCat adds that your friends have to trust you. So like this feels like it's fundamentally this human problem, sort of like starting a co-op where you need some people to share a small section of resources with in a sort of orderly way, and you need it to be stable enough that you can kind of trust things and trust that it's going to keep going, but that it'll also be secure. And I mean, you scale this up arbitrarily large, and you get another Google. So like, you don't want to keep scaling it, but if it's arbitrarily small, then like each person is individually running their own email server and farming their own wheat and like smelting their own iron ingots and whatever. So like, we clearly need some centralization, but not centralization that puts everything in the control of such a small group of people, but centralization that is distributed and lets us pool together some resources without centralizing the control. Yeah, if you can get some friends in on a colo box, I mean, that's totally the kind of thing that I did like in the past. I don't think I ever did this, but I had some friends that would like buy a monthly dedicated server at a colo, or like buy rack space for a server and then share that with their friends. I didn't have the resources to do that at the time that I would have wanted to, but I was always really into just finding old cheap hardware and hosting it at home or hosting it in my dorm, like when I was in college. Just like using whatever bandwidth I had available. I hosted a significant, just like little personal kind of site on a pair of DSL connections for a while. Actually, that's what turned into that check-in notification thing I mentioned earlier. I eventually moved that to various other donated servers, but for a long time that was hosted on a pair of DSL lines from the apartment that I had when I was living kind of near school, but not in the dorms. Self-hosting is fun, I agree.
So we've talked about Gmail a fair amount. I'm curious what other Google services people find to be sticky. I still have a fair amount of stuff on Google Drive, so I think that's my next thing, is to try to get that off.
I had some stuff on Google Drive, but I never used it a ton. It'll be tough for me to get off of YouTube though. Like, even if I don't want to publish my videos and I want to delete my account there's still just a lot of data that I would, I need to host somewhere. So like that's like part of the inspiration behind Diode Zone, is I wanted to host my own like alternative to the stuff that I have on YouTube. But like, that's a pretty big project when you have terabytes of video content.
TensorCat says they use Google Voice. I use Google Voice too.
I still have a Google Voice account, which I don't really use anymore, but I'd probably be worried about getting rid of it because like I'd need the number for something or other. Oh yeah, Deathflame said they're searching for a good Google Drive alternative and they're trying out Nextcloud. I've been using Nextcloud for like a year or two now, and I really like it. It's pretty resource intensive if you have a large drive, and sometimes like image thumbnailing and searching can be slow. So like there are some things that could be better, but it definitely I prefer using my own self-hosted Nextcloud to like using Google Drive or using Dropbox at this point. Oh yeah, GZB says Backblaze is the best file service on the cloud. I've had good experience with Backblaze too. I like their S2 object storage, or not S2, B2 object storage. It's like a little bit like S3. It's like a binary blob object store kind of thing. But the prices are better than S3, and it's not Amazon. The prices are actually really good. I haven't shopped around super recently, but last time I shopped around for like large amounts of cloud storage for doing offsite backups, B2 was like a really good deal compared to the alternatives. And so that's what I use to like keep my video archives offsite. I have rclone, which is, if you've ever used rsync, it's like it's just like a fast program to copy files from place to place while also like doing comparisons based on the metadata or the hash, so you can avoid copying things you've already copied. Our clone is kind of like that, except it's parallelized, so it can do many connections at once, and it supports a bunch of cloud service providers, including B2, and it supports like layered virtual file systems internally. So you can do things like merge file systems and encrypt file systems. So I find that super useful for doing offsite backups. I have my own layer of encryption with rclone. I can throw stuff in there and then send it to object storage, and it's relatively cheap. And it's also very fast. I can max out my gigabit connection with B2 uploads, which is not something I can do with very many services. Yeah, big files suck on rsync. If you're doing large backups, even without like the cloud services, rclone is kind of nice just because it's parallelized. But yeah, having all the different I/O options is super nice. It's pretty amazing how much concurrent transfers can matter these days. I feel like I've spent tons of time on all my backup setups just tuning my rclone parameters so that I can get the fastest transfer speeds without just completely running out of RAM. Oh, we've got a Twitch raid. Hello, hello. We were just having kind of an open-ended discussion about email providers and getting off of email, and this kind of like larger context of kind of practical solutions and ideas and discussion for kind of managing your relationship with big tech providers and kind of extracting things from their grip whenever you can. Samuel is asking what I mean by my own YouTube. Well, so I like being able to host my own stuff, and so I guess what I meant by my own YouTube was just like my own place to host video that I can, that I can share, that people can upload. The best thing that I've found for that so far is PeerTube, and it's certainly not perfect, but it's something that I like working on and running and supporting. So I've got an instance of that up at Diode Zone. Yeah, the RAM is always a limiting factor with big storage, and especially parallel transfers. Out of all the computers here, my storage server definitely has the most RAM, because it's the one that's always running these giant rclone jobs.
What were you saying sucks about rsync with large files?
So rsync just copies one thing at a time. So in a lot of cases, you'll be limited by the amount of bandwidth you can send or receive for a single transfer at once. This could be for a bunch of reasons. It could be that you have a bottleneck on the CPU somewhere, and there's a limit to how much you can do with one CPU thread. Or it could be that there's a limit to how much you can buffer in one particular like read ahead or write ahead buffer on one particular file. But if you do multiple files, you can get more buffer space. It could be an issue that the cloud service has limited bandwidth per connection, and using multiple connections gives you more throughput. It could be that the cloud connections are actually going to different back-end servers, so having multiple connections actually gives you more hardware resources on the other end that you're dealing with. So for like any number of reasons, you can end up with bottlenecks on a single connection that go away when you allow multiple connections concurrently. And so with rclone, you can do a lot of the same jobs as rsync, but you can say just transfer 16 things at a time, and it'll just do that. And usually by buffering like hundreds of megabytes of each file into RAM at a time. So that's why it uses tons of RAM. Oh, that's an interesting question. Haiba is asking what my thoughts are on library, spelled LBRY. I've looked into it a little bit. I can't tell if they're actually doing something interesting or if it's just like another kind of crypto pyramid scheme. So I'd be curious if other folks have details on that. It didn't seem like it was necessarily solving any technical problems or any social problems as far as I could tell, but I'd definitely be curious if other folks have thoughts on library. It's a question about if I'm the YouTuber that does cat electronics videos. That doesn't narrow it down super much because cats and electronics are both pretty popular on YouTube, but those are both things that I do. My cat's not in the room right now, but usually I have a cat cam for him on this stream. I moved at the end of last year, but before I moved, I had this kind of big warehouse space I was streaming from, and I had this remote control camera that would automatically follow Tuco around with a gimbal.
Before we go, I wanted to ask if anyone here has been using Scuttlebutt. We mentioned it earlier, but if anyone has thoughts, pro or con, or clients that they recommend, because I think me and Michael want to try it out more and maybe talk about it next time in more depth.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we only tried it pretty briefly and just with one client, so definitely curious if folks have feels about how to have a great experience on Scuttlebutt. But I definitely like the message here. It was a video about a 3D printer and beads, and I had a cat. That sounds like something I might have made. I've made videos that could be described like that. I had this project ages ago that I was doing with my 3D printer to make. I wanted to make like a Perler bead printer robot. So like Perler beads are these little crafting beads that are like multicolored. You can put them down on a grid and then iron them and make like little sprite objects. They look like pixel art, but they're physical. And back when I was really new at 3D printing and I had a really early 3D printer, I was trying to make this like kind of overly complicated design for a piece that would sort those beads into different colors and prepare to put them down on the grid. I didn't actually finish it mostly because I was trying to bite off this really complicated project with a 3D printer that barely worked, but it was certainly an interesting thing to work on. Yeah, Perler Bead Hopper. I put that on Thingiverse. Curious if Thingiverse is still working. I feel like every other time I go to Thingiverse, part of the website doesn't load, but maybe my firewall is just eating it. Oh yeah, so these are Perler beads, and then this is the little thing that I made. It looks like people have done 3D printed pegboards, which is kind of cute. And this looks familiar. I wonder if this was created. Oh yeah, somebody sent me this as a response. That's funny. Is this also a sorter? Huh. I don't know what this is for, but it seems interesting to spin the beads around. Oh, it's for threading. Oh, that's cool. This is a bit of a diversion, but yeah, Perler beads. Beads are cool. I guess if you spin them, they line up and you can catch them on a needle. Oh, it doesn't even need to be motorized. Oh, that's pretty neat. You just scoop them up. Okay, so that's cool, but not quite what I was looking for. I think I had a video of this, but this is like basically all I did. Like I made this piece and started on the piece below it, but I didn't actually finish the robot part. Oh, there's a video on Flickr. This is so old school. This is what I originally made that 3D printed spring generator in. I think some other folks got some use out of that at least. Gosh, this was a long time ago. What was this, like 2011? Yeah, 2011, early 2011 even. This was back when I was blogging in text. Yeah, anyway, Scuttlebutt. If you've got thoughts on Scuttlebutt, send it our way. Yeah, this is the one that we tried, which seemed promising. We just couldn't get the debug in for information we needed. But that might be a fun stream, even having an app that doesn't have built-in debug info, but like, oh, how would you get the debug info from the network? So that might be kind of fun. Like run this on a tablet or something, and then I don't know if anybody was here for this stream we did a while ago where I was running this. This was like earlier this year. I got one of those Ring doorbell cams, and I didn't want to like actually install it and just be a data source for the police, but I wanted to like take apart their protocol a little bit and show how that worked on the stream. So the way I did that was to connect it to kind of a dedicated Wi-Fi access point that I had a network route set up such that we could inspect all the traffic between that Wi-Fi access point and the rest of the network from a Raspberry Pi, and set up like man-in-the-middle attacks from there if we wanted to like replace data or try to decrypt the SSL or something. So we could try to get in there, but we could also just run something on another operating system that probably has like a log file that we could look at. This one even says it's recommended for first-timers, so we could even actually follow that advice. Oh, that's interesting. Alex says that there's somebody who earlier this year published a video that uses a modified Delta printer to do Perler sprites. That's pretty neat. Yeah, when I was making that Perler bot thing back in 2011, I was using this MakerBot Thingomatic printer. But of course now 3D printers have gone a long way. I still have that printer, but it's like really archaic. Like it's still not a bad just Cartesian robot platform, but all the extruder parts are kind of just like old enough that they're not really worth using. Like the kinds of extruders that you can get nowadays are just so much better. So it might be an interesting base for just some other project that needs a Cartesian robot, like a Perler printer. I thought it would be pretty cool if, I don't know, I was thinking about how to extend this. Everybody's got two-dimensional Perler bead sprites. Could you do three-dimensional Perler bead sprites? I was thinking it could put down layers and then like iron the layer and then put down another layer. So basically a 3D printer again, but making things out of discrete objects instead of a continuous feed. That might be kind of interesting. A little bit more like a pick and place, which you could also use to make 3D objects. It's kind of related to this idea that I used to entertain for making like a three-dimensional pick and place robot that could build sculptures out of surface mount parts. Yeah, so that was a whole bunch of random rambling, but I guess if we don't have anything that's actually on topic, we could wrap this up and avoid having it drag on endlessly. But yeah, anybody else have more topics for the stream?
I could wrap up soon too, but I saw Tamwell mention Radical, which I hadn't seen before, but taking a look at it, it looks pretty interesting. If I understand it correctly, it's kind of like a Git or code collaboration environment that is using Secure Scuttlebutt.
Oh, that's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah.
That's cool. Oh, and then the GZB is wondering how I'm streaming to Twitch and YouTube at the same time. And yeah, as Tamwell mentions, there's a pretty popular service, Restream, that'll do that. But I'm actually running my own server to do it because it seemed easy and fun and doesn't require me to fit inside of Restream's plan. So actually, if you wanted to run your own, I would check out the Nginx Rtmp module. This is a good starting point. I think it's actually in the main build now, but this tree might be slightly newer. So I run this on my own server. The main issue with that is that whatever you run that on is going to need a bunch of bandwidth. So I've got a fiber connection here, so I can just run it right here. But if you have a bottleneck in your local ISP, then you might need to run this on a cloud server of some sort. Oh yeah, that's a good question. GZB is wondering about my code. I did actually stick, I don't know how up to date this is, but at some point I did stick all my config files on GitHub, and I think it's still reasonably recent. Is this it? Yeah. Yeah, so this is actually everything that runs my OBS setup and my restreamer and my notification bots. And there's a little bit of documentation here in the README. This is not completely up to date because this is from before I moved and before I made some other changes. Yeah, you can see it hasn't been updated in 2 years. But my setup hasn't changed a huge amount. Like, I think most of this is still roughly the same. So these are named a little bit weirdly because it's based on the computers that are running these. And I try to explain that down here. But basically, if you go to color burst, it'll be my OBS setup, and spacer is the restreamer. And Nginx is the config file for that. Like, this is basically the same thing I'm currently running, except like I've redacted the keys and I might have adjusted some of the rates here and there. So the Nginx server has an endpoint that OBS sends video directly to, which is usually this one. So this will be some secret key that I've redacted, but OBS will encode, I think I have it set up to encode like 12 megabit H.264, so like archival quality basically, in OBS. And then I save that to disk locally for editing later and for retranscoding. YouTube always transcodes on their stream ingest, so I like to give YouTube the highest quality video I can because they're already going to transcode it to various bit rates. Whereas Twitch, on the other hand, they want no more than 3,500 kilobits, at least last time I looked at this. So this sends the video directly to YouTube, which is this push. It sends it to a local monitor, which I don't use that often, but is mostly for testing. And then it runs this FFmpeg to do transcoding on the video stream to 3500K, and that copies the lower bandwidth video out to this other endpoint, the underscore 3500. So then that goes out to another local monitor and to Twitch. And I was also using Beam for a while, but I don't think that's even a thing anymore. So that's like basically what you need. If you install a recent version of Nginx with the Rtmp plugin, then you just need to put a config file like this in your Nginx config and set it up to your taste. It's relatively easy to add other stuff to this, like if you need HLS output. That's roughly how I'm getting this live.diode.zone/scanlime. I don't actually have the code for this in that repository because it's a bit newer, but this is just an HLS output on that same system. And then the notifications are done via a combination of this exec that runs this Node.js script. That's the actual chatbot that announces the script or the stream on like chat and Twitter and Mastodon. And then it also sends out screenshots every, I think, hour and a half or something. And the screenshots are generated by, I think that's this thing here. Record interval 5 minutes, record max frames 2. So every 5 minutes, this will call this script to record just a couple of frames of video to PNG files. And then this JavaScript chatbot thing will read those PNG files and send some of them over Twitter. So that comes out over here. Right there. So yeah, if anybody wants the code for that, that's scanlime/broadcasting on GitHub. Alex says 3D printer extrusion systems are a rabbit hole and a half. Yeah, for sure. Gosh, I could talk for hours even just about the extruder on that one particular printer, because that was a kit printer, and the extruder that it came with was just bad. That generation of MakerBot had a DC motor extruder. So it didn't have a stepper motor. It just had one of the old-fashioned DC motors where you turn on the power and it spins at some arbitrary speed and you have no idea how fast it's actually moving, and it's totally open loop. So that was bad enough already, and then it had some kind of manufacturing flaw where some of the motors could easily get their brushes into a state where the inrush current was especially high at startup, and then the combination of that inrush current and some underspecified transistor on the board would just cause it to not start the motor, and it would just like sit there not extruding and getting hot. It was terrible. So I replaced that old original extruder with a MakerGear aftermarket extruder. And that's what it still got. So, but like even that it's just like very slow and bad. Like I feel like I'd rather use the parts for something else than try to use that as a printer at this point. Gosh, Hiba on YouTube chat points out that Amazon recently changed their Ring network to use your neighbor's network or their other Rings or Alexas. So even if you think your network is isolated, it's not. Yeah, I don't know how much they're using that for. The last I heard about that, they were changing their user agreement such that they could basically just set up their own Wi-Fi access point on any of the hardware that you've allowed into your house that they manufactured. Um, I hadn't heard that they were going to use that for Ring also, but that's not really surprising. Yeah, Amazon Sidewalk is what they call the Wi-Fi access point thing. But yeah, I don't know how much bandwidth they were expecting that to actually be able to provide. I don't know if they're going to be using that for like video downloads or whatever, or if it's just for like unlocking your front door. But either way, yeah, I would not actually install. Like there are certain kinds of devices that I feel like you can install them in a way that doesn't require you to trust them. Like I've got some IP cameras here where I don't feel like I have to trust the firmware that's on the IP camera because it's got very few inputs and outputs. Like it's got a camera, it's looking at a specific thing, and it's got a network connection, and I can control what the network connection is connected to. It's all firewalled off from the wider internet. But as soon as your object has a radio in it, now you have to worry about what the radio might be talking to. And Amazon has proven that they cannot be trusted with a radio. Okay, Glasses and Beards adds that Sidewalk is 915 megahertz LoRa, not Wi-Fi, which is definitely not something they would use for video if that's the case. But still, I wouldn't want that. Like, I think some of my neighbors here have Rings, and it makes me want to set up a LoRa jammer just for that. It's not actually illegal to jam 915 megahertz, is it? Because it's ISM band. I don't know. I think FCC lets you send like up to a certain power and up to a certain message length in ISM. So I don't know if you could continuously jam, but maybe it wouldn't be illegal to just send long packets over 915 megahertz very frequently, but not quite continuously. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Check with your local FCC. Or don't in Minecraft for parody purposes. Oh yeah, Artifact says that they were a bit annoyed with the direction MakerBot went. Totally, I think everybody was, right? Like, yeah, so they got a replicator too that still works great, but then they abandoned the software pretty early on. Yeah, I have one MakerBot printer, which is that Thingamatic, and I feel like it was this great kind of early hobbyist printer if you had very low expectations and you had a lot of time to just fuss around with it. But I think everybody who started out with MakerBot around that period of time was very disappointed with the direction the company went in. GCP says they wouldn't want me as their neighbor. I try to be a good neighbor. I'll only jam your electronics if I think they're malicious. Oh yeah, DevFlame suggests covering open source home assistants. That might be interesting. Yeah, I haven't really looked into that here. I feel like I'm a bit curmudgeonly at this point and don't find myself wanting a computer I can talk to at home, but it would be kind of interesting to look at the open source options and see like what is there in that Star Trek future that can be divorced from the the corporate overlords that currently control most of that technology. I know some people are working on like voice machine learning. Like I forget what it's called, but I thought Mozilla had a project to do speech to text. GZB is wondering if I teach programming. Not professionally. I mean, I try. I feel like the stuff that I do is to some extent education, but no, I've never been like a regular teacher like that. Like I've been trying to approach teaching people about programming and electronics through the internet rather than IRL for the most part. I did some IRL classes a while back. I even used to do these workshops that I would travel all around the world and like teach people how to build things out of LEDs. But I mostly stopped doing that because I found that it was just like not sustainable for me. It was like really bad for my mental health, and it was just kind of not really worth it in the end. Like it seems like I can reach more people and take care of myself better over the internet. Cool. Yeah. No, I think jamming radios in Minecraft is perfectly great. Smashing the surveillance apparatus of capitalism in Minecraft. On YouTube chat, Highboss says that they've run OpenHab, Z-Wave, and some Wi-Fi for years for home automation, and it works pretty well. And that recently there's a Google TPU USB thing that's been kind of interesting, but they haven't integrated it into their home flow. I guess TPU, you mean like tensor processing unit for running like machine learning models. I'm curious why that would be useful for home automation. Like, do the models require that much power just to like interrogate them with audio data? Because my impression was that stuff like that was usually running on like a pretty middle of the road general purpose CPU on most devices. But if you're doing like video processing or if you're training a model, yeah, the more power you've got, the better. But for just interrogating a model on something like audio, I wouldn't expect it to be as super. Oh, they added that it's for things like pose? You mean like video processing, or like are you estimating pose from voice? Are we listening to the reflections off the soft and hard surfaces in the room? Data science on lawn health. See, I'd be interested in doing like, I don't know, I like collecting video and doing time lapses and stuff like that. If I cared more about lawns, I'd probably have like a lawn time lapse. But yeah, I feel like I've been kind of sleeping on the home automation scene lately. It's funny, I used to be really into the home automation stuff when I didn't actually like live in a place I had any control over. When I was much younger and I was living in my parents' house, and actually it was sort of a way to get a little bit of control back in that circumstance, I guess, because I was kind of stuck living in the basement and avoiding my family as much as possible. And one of the things I enjoyed doing was having some of those like X10 appliance modules set up so that I could turn on and off lights that I normally wouldn't have control over. I figured pose detection was for people, but I guess I was wondering if you're talking about video or audio at this point. I've usually heard about pose detection as something that you do in a video processing domain. It makes sense why you need a bunch of hardware for that. But if we were talking about audio, I'm not aware of pose recognition from audio, but I think that would be kind of funny if it exists. Am I drinking blinker fluid? No, it's a different thing that comes in a can, like a normal thing that humans drink. Just human things, you know. See, it'd be more interesting. I feel like it'd be more interesting even than disabling the Ring network to use it to like watch the watchers. If there's a way to figure out who's requesting data from the Ring network and where, that would be pretty interesting, theoretically. Escape from Gmail. Yeah, basically. I mean, we're kind of wrapping things up at this point, but most of this discussion was kind of on reducing your personal dependency on the big tech providers, and then specifically we were talking about email and what are some of folks' favorite alternatives to Gmail, and what are people using or want to use, and talking about that a bunch. It seems like there's some interesting self-hosting options and some other providers that might not suck. Outlook. I mean, you're joking, but actually, is there I don't even know what people mean by that now, because like when you say Outlook, I'm like, oh yes, the computer program, but like they probably have some cloud thing now, like how, I don't know, Windows does not mean a program that you install on your computer anymore. Windows is a service, as they so helpfully tell you while you're doing your updates. But if you mean like the mail client Outlook, then I mean, that's kind of a step in the right direction if you're running a mail client on your own computer and connecting it to something separate. I feel like one way to reduce your dependency on a single provider is to switch to systems that are a little bit modular so that you can mix and match the pieces.
Yeah, speaking of email clients, I keep hearing how Thunderbird is sort of orphaned at this point. Like Mozilla's not supporting it enough, and yet it's one of the most common email clients.
That's interesting. I feel like Thunderbird has been this thing that has seemed like it would be useful for a long time, but every time I try to use it, it feels unsatisfying. But I think last time I tried to use it, computers were much slower, and it just felt like really slow and annoying and big, and maybe that isn't the case nowadays. Zulu King offers the opinion that big tech is just going to buy all the small promising startups, so you've got to self-host, otherwise it's just a matter of time. I mean, there's maybe some truth to that, but it seems like maybe some of these providers are not angling to be startups that get bought up by Google, but they're trying to have an independent business model. Oh, interesting. On the home automation topic, Highball from the YouTube chat says that they want to collect data on sort of what your state is, like where you are in the home, so that you can kind of have things automatically trigger interactions, if I understand this right. That could be interesting. There are so many really unobtrusive ways to gather just like small amounts of information about people's position and pose. For a long time ago, I got pretty deep into this rabbit hole of exploring electric field-based sensors. So a little bit like what you'd use for like a tablet, but maybe a little closer to an AM radio transceiver. The idea was that you'd have a signal that's roughly like 150 kilohertz sine wave coming out of an antenna or like a capacitive coupled pad on a sensor, and then coupled into your hand or some other part of your body, and then coupled back into another antenna. And I was experimenting with systems like this back in like 2001 or so, and it wasn't too hard to get like 10 inches of range out of them or so. So if you have a surface that you're interacting, you could like move your hand around, and but the data you get out of them is like really nonlinear and really weird. So that was actually my first experiment playing with neural networks. It's like I was trying to convert the data from that sensor back to just an XYZ coordinate. But I imagine that now like signal processing is much easier, and you could probably keep the transmitters and receivers in sync over long distances using cheap serial networks now, so you wouldn't need just like one giant circuit board like I had. And you could probably just have these electric field sensors like on the wall or something. I mean, it's easier to just put a camera in the room, but maybe sometimes you don't want a camera. Like if you want like a good example would be like motion sensor lights in your bathroom, right? Like you want something that knows if you're there, but you don't want to put a camera in your bathroom, probably. I mean, you do you, but like I wouldn't recommend it. Tamuel says that they think Thunderbird is big because it can do so many things. It's also a chat client and an RSS reader. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's definitely something you get into when you start trying to like how do people feel about HTML emails anyway? Like I feel like I could completely just remove HTML email from my life and it would be fine. Um, but if you want them to work, you pretty much either need something that's relatively thick and has most of a web browser in it, or you need a web app. But yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I used Mutt as my mail client, and if I absolutely had to read an HTML email, I would just save it to a file and open it with a web browser. Zulu King says that Outlook uses Word's HTML renderer and it sucks. I'm surprised they don't use Internet Explorer. And that Gmail ain't better. Yeah, I mean, even if you're running in a web browser, rendering HTML email is certainly not straightforward, both from a correctness and a security standpoint. Yeah, I feel like using Gmail, it's like easy to not notice you're viewing an HTML email, but like if you're using a text mail client, it's just nice to always be sure that you're getting the text version of the email. MU4E, is that a mail user for Emacs? Or is that something else? Yeah, I've never used I use Emacs for other things, but I've never tried using it for mail. I'd probably still use Mutt though. I mean, I used Mutt as my daily drive email at work and on my own projects. Engineers, where I was in the company, there were other people who were used to Outlook and sending and receiving HTML all the time. VI for Emacs. I mean, I am kind of doing that these days. Like, I used to use just like plain vanilla Emacs for a long time, but these days I've been using Doom Emacs and Evil Mode a lot more. So yeah, I feel like my fingers are getting programmed into this weird mashup of VI and Emacs key bindings at this point. Because there are some things that I still have very strong muscle memory for with my old school Emacs habits, and so I find myself using Emacs key bindings for those. And then there's other stuff which is either just simpler in Vim or which I only bothered learning in Vim, and so I use those, and it's kind of a mess. Oh, did the Twitch stream die? Well, I was about to wrap up anyway, so maybe this is just a sign that I should probably actually wrap up, and folks will be able to see the whole thing on the archive if they missed a bit of this later. Yeah, that's a little annoying, but not, I guess, the biggest loss since we're on our way out anyway. Oh, Diode Zone had a hiccup too. Interesting. I don't know what that would have been then. Maybe just my whole internet connection? We could actually take a look at that. Oh, maybe I'm not actually logged in though. Maybe I'll look at that on my own computer. It must have been a really short glitch. It's not showing up on my graphs yet. Well, I'm glad Twitch is back. Yeah, I've got the stream over here, and I saw the video monitor cut out for Twitch, but I wasn't sure if that was the stream actually dying or whether it was a problem on my receive end. Huh. Well, I'll look at these graphs in more detail later, but I don't see an obvious problem on my end right now, so... the joys of network debugging. Anyway, I think I'll probably try to wrap this up. It looks like Z already took off. Thanks for hanging out. Oh, maybe Z's coming back to say goodbye. Oh yeah, Z gives the thumbs up. So yeah, I was just going to wrap this up. Thanks so much for stopping by and chatting for a bit. I'm going to keep this stream short and sweet, but I've been trying to get more into the habit of streaming multiple times a week rather than just multiple times a year. So I already did a couple of streams earlier this week on the kind of deep Rust sandboxy project that I've been working on. And I've still been working on that. I'd love to fill folks in on that in a day or two. And yeah. That's a good question. Highball's wondering if I post topics before I go live. I have not been able to prepare that well consistently lately. Yeah, I mean, when I know very solidly what I'm streaming on and when, I do try to announce them on Twitter or even schedule them on YouTube with their scheduling thing. But often this is just kind of me getting things going as quickly as I can and trying to like pull it together without super knowing when it's going to start. So my approach so far has been to have a notification bot rather than a schedule. So if you want to get on the notification bot train, you can follow Scanlime Live on Twitter or follow it on YouTube or Twitch in the usual ways. But I'm also just trying to get better at this. So like, yeah, I should really try to have a schedule at some point, and when I do, I'll certainly post it here and tell folks about it. So, and special thanks to all my folks on Patreon who are keeping this stream going with their monthly contributions. That's why I've been able to spend so much time hacking on projects and still pay my electric bill. So I appreciate your contributions, and if you're helping out, then certainly let me know. If you like what you see, if you want me to do something else. I'm doing this for you, and I appreciate all the input that I can get. So thank you. And yeah, happy hacking, folks. I'll see you next time with some more programming and taking things apart and putting things together, and all this sort of tech stuff that we find ourselves mired in. Be doing more of it. See you next time. And of course, Cat. We had a little bit of that today, but then Tuco wandered off. See you next time.